Italian Grand Prix is underway. Lando Norris is looking at his teammate and he's got the launch that he needs, but George Russell is still a contender. Second and third are battling. Piastri blocks out Russell. Lando Norris has got to the front. Russell goes onto the grass and over the road. He momentarily takes the lead, but he'll have to feather it back. McLaren finally get the start they needed from Lando Norris. It's Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri. Russell loses out as a result of going over the road at turn number 1. It's Charles Leclerc, then Carlos Sainz as the McLarens are side by side, and Oscar Piastri's going all the way around the outside to take the lead with a bold and brilliant move. Lando still can't keep the lead on lap number 1, and he's lost second place to Charles Leclerc.
I can't believe what I've just seen. Absolutely brilliant stuff from Oscar Piastri, who knows that if he's running anywhere near his teammate, that McLaren have to start thinking big picture. He now changes that completely by leading this Grand Prix.
That could be move of the season. That was extraordinary from Piastri on his teammate, round the outside, low downforce, low grip, and he's into the race lead.
Big gravel there between the two Haas cars as they scrabble all over the road, and that's Hülkenberg losing positions and dropping down the order. Magnussen gets by, Gasly gets by.
This gets very, very tight for George Russell then. He gets a good launch, but the McLarens lock out that inside path. Piastri then, he squeezes wide. And that is super tight there for Russell. Here's the sensational move, late on the brakes from Piastri. So close but fair between the two McLarens, and it's just a beautiful move from Piastri. No sign of team orders, quite clearly, for McLaren, and it cost Norris another position. The big lurid slide, through goes Leclerc.
This is Hülkenberg, contact with Daniel Ricciardo, then he's going to scrape across the gravel, through goes Kevin Magnussen, and that put the dust on the racing line. It's a 5-second time penalty for Daniel Ricciardo for forcing another car off the track. This is going to be Hülkenberg trying a late send and making contact as a result. That is pure frustration. We go on board with the German driver, trying to scrub off the speed and hitting Yuki Tsunoda.
Never on from there.
Here's the move for Sergio Perez. He got a horrible amount of dirty air coming through the parabolica, sent him wide through that corner. But even with that, he's able to move ahead into the braking zone and take 7th place. And George Russell has gone from chasing 3rd position, trying to turn it into 2nd position, going long at the first corner of the racetrack, and he's tumbled down to 8th position. Kevin Magnussen fights his way by. He's got past Daniel Ricciardo at the Rettifilo chicane, the first one on the racetrack.
Lando suggests we do box to overtake on Leclerc, box to overtake.
So the call comes out. He's hit the marker coming into the pits, and I think he got away with it, but was he over the pit lane speed limit?
Well, we'll find out pretty soon, but that's a lack of concentration, or a drop in concentration for Lando. It was a late call from the team. Let's see if it works out.
In comes Charles Leclerc trying to cover off that pit stop for McLaren. Also in Lewis Hamilton. And he's powering through, he's getting ahead. There he is, told you he was ahead. We caught it at the end. Lando Norris leaps up to what will become a net 2nd place in the race. This is Kevin Magnussen trying to pull off another overtake, and this time wasn't as special as the move at the first chicane. Contact with Pierre Gasly.
Yep, on that dusty inside line, locks up, and it was always going to be contact if Gasly didn't use the escape roads.
Norris starting to struggle. This is when Red Bull started to have drainage around lap 15 in the stint.
This is George Russell up against Sergio Perez. Russell trying to go around the outside, and again he's having to scamper over the road at the first chicane. He knows the rules of engagement though, and he will have to give Perez the place back. He does so. Is he going to try and do it in a way that gives him an opportunity to attack once again? Race control can sometimes be a bit sniffy about that if they don't feel you gave back the advantage, and Russell stays behind. He's on the charge though at the moment, trying to take Perez. This is Lando Norris. Now we're heading to the 2nd chicane, in fact. On board with the driver who was 2nd and having to go to the correct side of the bollards and rejoin. So it is a 2-stopper. Unlike previous years, he will get the rubber first. And Lando Norris being held for a moment there, 3.3 seconds.
Magnussen back in the wars, this time with Alex Albon.
Consequential move that for Kevin Magnussen, up 4 places from where he started the Grand Prix. He hasn't scored a point here in a decade at Monza, and he gets by Alex Albon, who had fresher tyres on the car.
on the canvas.
Oh my word, George Russell trying to scrub off the speed from 200 miles per hour was eventually given the space by Sergio Perez and then deliberately ran it deep into the first turn to make a point, I believe. He's going to go wheel to wheel with Sergio Perez once again battling over 8th position. Outside line for Perez. Can Russell keep a wheel in there? And it's good speed for that Mercedes. Through goes George Russell and he's up to 8th. We cut to Oscar Piastri in the pits. McLaren have dealt with the car and have put on a new set of hard tyres. Charles Leclerc takes the lead of the Grand Prix.
I don't think this is working out well at all for McLaren. Norris is barely quicker than Leclerc and Sainz right now, tucked in behind Verstappen. It's not working for them, and that's a huge risk. Pitting Piastri under no pressure in the race lead, it's a huge risk because they've just handed Ferrari right now a 1-2, and they can just see if they can make these hard tyres go to the end. Oscar's got to unleash some serious pace to go and catch them.
Norris going for it. Going past, and that is a fairly efficient move. I don't think Verstappen can come back into turn number 1. By the time that we get to the second chicane, there might be an opportunity. McLaren need to put the hammer down now as Norris gets ahead of his rival for the championship. The Ferrari clearly doesn't have the grip. We don't see many passes for position into Ascari. It might be about to change. Oscar Piastri fights his way through to second place. He's cleared one Ferrari. The next one is denying him the top step for the second time in his career. Lando Norris got super close to Carlos Sainz, not in the right part of the racetrack. It is going to be third position for Lando Norris, who started this race on pole. He held the lead into turn number 1, but his teammate got by into the second chicane. And since then, Piastri has been the lead McLaren.
He's bringing it right now. He's only 0.2 off his best lap of the race, Charles Leclerc. There's not a huge sign of degradation for him. And Piastri on the last lap was only half a second quicker. And he is right now doing everything right for a victory for Ferrari at Monza.
These are magical moments at Monza. This did not seem possible when Charles Leclerc started 4th on the grid, but it will be a season of home victories for Charles Leclerc. The man from Monaco is the man for Monza. The Tifosi are roaring him home, and for the second time in his career, Charles Leclerc is the winner of the Italian Grand Prix for Ferrari. He's won the race by 2.6 seconds for his 7th career victory, and it's one to savor.
This is the Outlap F1 podcast featuring America's own Cody, Andy, and Deanna, your one-stop shop for Formula One news, insights, race previews, and reviews. Join us on the Outlap. What is up, Outlap F1 Nation? This will be Season 6, Episode number 33 of the Outlap F1 podcast. It's the 2024 Italian GP Race Review Show. You've got Andy, and I'm along with Cody tonight. Cody, how's it hanging on Sunday, extended holiday weekend day, lots of racing across all sorts of categories day?
It has been fantastic. I love a good 3-day weekend. This one's been filled up with all kinds of fun stuff. Got my racing fix today between Formula One and the second IndyCar race. I kept up with the one yesterday when I wasn't at Pearl Jam, which was a blast. So yeah, so far so good. It's a great weekend.
Yeah, I mean, it's been absolutely wonderful weather, and, you know, we get like 2 weeks of really great weather in the city. So go out, enjoy would be what I would suggest you do. I hope to go try to do that tomorrow. You can find, but that's not why you're all here. You're not here to get a Chicago weather report. You're here because we're going to talk about the Italian GP, which turned out to be a lot more wild and crazy than any of us probably thought when the race started. So you can find our show, as always, Twitter, Instagram, Discord, Reddit, and of course YouTube at Outlap F1 Podcast is the handle for all of that. If you are on YouTube and you enjoy what you're hearing and you like what you're seeing, you can do as the kids do and smash the subscribe button, or you can leave us a like. If you're on your favorite podcasting app, if you want to leave us a 5-star review, That would help us out quite a bit. What does that do? Just helps us come up a little bit better in search results, helps us get our content to you that much quicker. Email the show. You can always do that. Chat now at outlapf1.com. Thank you so much for the folks who do continue to support us monetarily, including Dean Warwick, Yuri Dolchester, Paul Weaver, Quentin Warden, Kevin Kelly, Regan Stanzik, Timothy Brown, and, of course, Jonathan Scott. If you'd like to become a member of that hashtag OutlapF1 Nation, you can see our link tree with our anchor link. $1, $5, all goes into making the show better. Buying new equipment, upgrading equipment we already have, all just trying to make the overall product a little bit better for you, the listener, which is why we're all here. Last note before we get into all of this proper, you can find our code with the good folks at Manscaped and use it to take 20% off and get free shipping with the good folks at Manscaped. That's Outlap, OUTLAP. One word, use that as you are checking out. And you get a good deal there. All right. Once again, post-preview episode, because we actually did do one for this weekend. We had more news break, of course, in the middle of the F1 weekend. And that you can take the Mercedes second, or I don't even know if they call it a Mercedes second seat. You can take the Mercedes seat that was available after Lewis Hamilton left off the board. Kimi Antonelli, the vaunted 18-year-old, will now take over the seat going into 2025. Toto Wolff was apparently very impressed by his FP1 outing, which resulted in 5 laps and then him banning the car. I don't think that's really what it came down to, because according to Toto Wolff, apparently he decided on Kimi Antonelli 5 minutes after Lewis Hamilton had told him he was leaving for Ferrari. So not a huge shocker by any stretch, but they are big shoes to fill. Lewis Hamilton leaving a seat that he's been in for, a very, very, very long time. Cody, what's your thought on all this, especially given kind of Kimi Antonelli's meh F2 season, but it's looking better more and more, it seems?
It's definitely not surprising. I think everyone has been assuming that Antonelli was going to get that seat for a long time now. So now it's only just official, and we can all go, oh, we knew that was going to happen anyway. I do think that he is going to be a very impressive driver because, we look back on some drivers like Max Verstappen that really didn't even participate very much in the normal main junior Formula Series, the lead up to Formula One, and look at Max now. I think that Antonelli, like his current teammate Behrman, has a lot more talent than their current junior series run would really reveal. We got to remember too that Kimi Antonelli, I believe he skipped Formula 3, if I'm correct, went straight to Formula 2, which is kind of notorious for being a series where it takes some time to get come to grips with the car. And he definitely was showing that earlier on in the Formula 2 season, but he's got a win under his belt already. He's been performing much better lately. I think that the talent is really there, and people who are much more in the know and much more savvy about talent hunting than I know that he is the next big thing. So I'm sure that when he ends up in that Mercedes seat next year, hopefully the car is really good and he's able to show his stuff right away. But I do think he'll be very successful.
I think I think that's the kind of the big question is, how good is he going to be right out of the gate? I think Mercedes have to be willing to deal with some rookie mistakes, which is something they have not had to deal with, I think, in a long time. I hope that they haven't, especially Toto, has not put too much pressure on this kid. He seems like it's not letting him bother him at all. He seemed like he was very much in his element. All that was fine. I don't blame him for how he even, crashed the car in FP1. Apparently there were a couple other much more experienced drivers that almost had that same moment in that exact same corner. So I think that was just green track trying to set the world on fire, and he got a little overzealous. So I'll say that that's fine. I just hope they're not setting this poor kid up for failure, is kind of the only concern I have. But if he's really the goods, the goods are the goods. I mean, regardless of kind of whether you do the F3 and F2 ladder or whether you don't, if you're the goods, Formula One is going to show you whether or not you're the goods. So I've seen a lot of different commentary on like, well, boy, it kind of sucks that the Mercedes car is as good as it is. Well, no, that means that he can come in and feel confident in the car all that much better versus trying to learn in a car that's harder to drive. It's probably better for his career that he's not going to go to like a Williams and learn, try to develop that. I mean, it's really the only success story that I can think of recently has been Charles Leclerc, who went to, the Sauber and kind of got better. But a lot of the other guys who come up who end up in those, backmarker or midfield seats, they don't really go anywhere. I mean, we've been talking about this with Esteban Ocon all of his career. He was supposed to be a Mercedes driver, and then he just wasn't there. And I think it's Toto Wolff has got this buyer's remorse that he never went all in on Max, and he sees what Max is going on to do, and he's trying to make up for it. I just hope and pray that this is not putting too much on this kid's shoulders. It's going to be on him as to how he handles it. Right now, it's all good and fun. We'll see what happens next year. But I wish him luck. I really do. Him being good and Mercedes being good is good for the sport because it's another team in the mix, which is all what we want. Okay, so following that announcement that happened, I think that was Friday, we'll actually get into our weekend proper here, and we shall start with our headlines of the day. Cody, I'll let you go first here. What you got?
I'm going to go with Forza Ferrari. We have tacked on another feel-good victory for the season. It seems like they just keep coming. Charles Leclerc has had two now. We first had his home Grand Prix victory in Monaco, and now we have the home Grand Prix victory for the Ferrari team. It was pretty unexpected. He really had to make a different strategy work that not really anybody else was trying. I don't think he even felt very confident with it based on some comments that he had after his pit stop. But he made it work, man, and made McLaren look a little silly and like they had thrown it away in gaining this victory. So I think it's very exciting. At this point, it looks like it's going to be McLaren probably romping to more victories than not for the rest of the season. So, at this point, seeing a Ferrari or a Mercedes or hell, even a Red Bull at this point getting a victory in, I think will be pretty exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in a lot of agreement with my headline, and mine is every now and again, the long shot pays off. Full credit to Charles Leclerc and to the Ferrari strategy wall, who we have many times criticized on this show before. They effectively stole this one with a brilliant one-stop strategy that none of the other top four teams even considered, going through all of the team radios as I have, because I was like, okay, was just McLaren the only one that was going to go two-stop? No, they all went two-stop. And they all didn't think that this was going to work. And they proved, and whether it was Leclerc being the whisperer, however it panned out, or getting through the graining, or whatever he did it. So full props, I tip my hat. And that did make the Tifosi go wild. And we did get our Ferrari wins in Monza podium and all of that. I would tell you, you don't usually hear the crowd a lot of times in Formula One races. I heard the crowd for the last 6 laps. Oh, yeah. So let's put it that way. That is a unique environment, especially when there's a red car out in front. I can only imagine what it would have been like to be there to witness that. So full props to Charles Leclerc. Great victory for him. So we will start with the qualifying recap. So going out in P20 and P19 in qualifying were the Kick Saubers of Zhao Guanyu and Valtteri Bottas, respectively. We'll have to talk about the fan that looked like Valtteri Bottas. That was probably the most highlight of, I think, the Kick Sauber years so far. P18, the new Williams driver of Franco Colapinto did not have a great first qualifying session. He goes out in P18. P17 was Lance Stroll. Aston Martin not having a very good qualifying session either. P16, Yuki Tsunoda. Advancing through to Q2 was P15, Esteban Ocon. P14, Pierre Gasly. P13, Kevin Magnussen. P12, Daniel Ricciardo. And P11, again, more pain for the Aston Martin team. That was Fernando Alonso. Top 10 from 10 to 1. P10 was Nico Hülkenberg. P9, Alex Albon. P8, Sergio Perez. P7, shocker here for sure, Max Verstappen in the Red Bull. P6 was Lewis Hamilton. P5, Carlos Sainz. P4, Charles Leclerc. P3 was George Russell. P2, Oscar Piastri. And in P1 with a lap time of 1:19.327, Lando Norris in the other McLaren. All right. Cody, big thoughts here in the qualifying session.
Any good feelings that I had for Max and Red Bull going into this race were dashed after that qualifying session because Max was nowhere in Q3 and probably one of his worst qualifying sessions in a long time. And yeah, it's not looking good for him. I figured that this was going to be a race where McLaren was going to take a huge chunk of points out of him in the driver standings. And as a Max fan, I found that to be a little disappointing. I did find myself actually rooting for him pretty strongly during the race, and it just, we'll talk about that. It never came. But yeah, he was off to a rocky start right away in qualifying. As far as Franco Colapinto, yeah, he's qualified at the back. I didn't really expect anything different. And if you really look at it compared to Alex Albon, for their Q1 run, he was only about half a second, maybe slightly more than half a second off of Alexander Albon. Considering it's his first time out for the Formula One weekend, I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt on this one and chalk it up to that half a second really not being too bad. So yeah, he's 18th, but he didn't destroy the car either, which is something Williams has been hoping for. So I think that earns him a point in their book.
No, I didn't mean to jump on him when I said that. It was just interesting that he seemed to think he was going to get out of Q1. When he came on the radio, he was a lot more disappointed, and whatever happened with his lap just didn't come together. So, I think he had. I don't know how much we'll talk about him when we actually get to the race. So I'm just going to say it right now. He had himself a very good debut weekend overall for Williams. And I think Williams overall had a fairly good weekend themselves. Big notes here. Alonso not making Q3. That was unexpected. Albon making Q3 and getting P9. That was, I think, a bit unexpected as well. So that was positive vibes, I think, all the way for Williams. The surprises, Sergio Perez. Well, I don't know that that's a surprise anymore. Qualifying last of the the top 8. But Max Verstappen, his worst qualifying since Singapore last year. And we all know how they managed to struggle with the car that entire weekend. It seemed a lot like that here. Lots of meetings with Helmut Marko and the engineering staff and trying to figure out what the car is, and Max not happy on the radio, and all of that just kind of coalesced into a not great qualifying. So it looked like he was going to start the weekend off on the back foot. Other surprise, believe it or not, especially given the practice form, Lewis Hamilton in P6. He looked like he was going to be on for a top 3 easy, or a top maybe 2 or even pole position, especially given the form that he had, and I think especially Q2, but it just did not come together for him in Q3. And I guess I can get a little bit more excited as a McLaren fan because, this is now a completely different track and they're still fast. Congratulations. Mm-hmm. Here we are. So at this point of the weekend, I was very happy with the overall effort from the team. Oscar right on Lando's tail. The top 4, I think it was 0.1, I think it's 1/10 of a second all the way through the top 5. Yeah, so insanely close. It looks like, the McLarens, who have been the fastest car, went 1-2 in another racetrack, but it's thin margins. It's ridiculously thin margins. Okay, so we will move into the race itself, and we shall start, as we are always apt to do, with our back markers. So being not classified only after 7 laps was the Red Bull, or the V-Carb of Yuki Tsunoda. P19 was Lance Stroll in the Aston Martin. P18 was Zhao Guanyu in the Kick Sauber. P17, Nico Hulkenberg in the Haas. P16, Valtteri Bottas in the other Kick Sauber. P15 was Pierre Gasly. P14, Esteban Ocon P13, the first of the cars not to be one lap down, that was Daniel Ricciardo in the other V-Carb. Any big thoughts here in the back markers?
Let's see here. We had some pretty rotten luck for Yuki Tsunoda. Ends up with damage fairly early on in the race. The only DNF here, from what they were talking about on the broadcast, Tsunoda has not had a good run at this track in general over the years, so the bad luck for him just continues. A little bit of maybe sloppy driving at some points during the race for Nico Hülkenberg. He did get into a collision at one point that left him a little worse off, and then ended up just making it worse with himself with locking up the brakes, I believe going into that first turn, and causing another collision. I believe he earned a penalty for that as well. So yeah, not a great one for Hülkenberg either.
Yeah, I mean, nothing really huge. I know Daniel Ricciardo had got himself a 5-second penalty off the start, and then it was just kind of one of those instinctual things when he came into the pit stop. The front tire guy just happened to touch the car, and that's a no-no, which meant that you don't serve your penalty correctly, which means that now you have another penalty. So any hope of Daniel trying to resurrect what had been up to that point a fairly decent weekend for him pretty much went out the door. But, no huge surprises back here. I mean, Lance Stroll, I guess, kind of, but not really.
I felt so bad for that pit crew member for Daniel Ricciardo, because you can see on the camera shots that they had that he realized his mistake right away. He's just going through, like you said, like the motions, the instinct of trying to guide the car or, whatever he's doing. And he's got his hand on the wing, and all of a sudden he just like pulls it away super quick. And he's like looking around like, oh God, I messed up. And it really didn't probably have any meaningful effect on the pit stop at all. Like, it's not like, someone with like the wheel gun had already started like loosening a nut for the wheel or anything like that. He literally just touched the car. But as they say, the rules are the rules. They say that you cannot touch the car until the penalty time has elapsed. And, just touching that wing was enough to stack on another penalty.
I mean, I wonder, had they realized it and had they just said start the count after he lets it go, would that have been enough? But I guess in that case, it's such an odd situation anyway that the crews train, and we watched when we've gone to Circuit of the Americas before. We've seen them, do the drills, and the drills are all, change the front wing, change the rear wing, do a penalty simulation, but it's all about trying to nail, and right when that 5 seconds happens, already be in your motion to start changing the tires because you're trying to be that precise. Yeah, I mean, I felt bad for that guy. I mean, he's just trying to do what is instinctual, and he realized it, and it kind of even looked like to me like, oh God, I've stepped in lava. Mm-hmm. Like the car was lava, and oh God, I've stepped in it. And I hope nobody saw, and unfortunately people did. So that did kind of ruin Daniel Ricciardo's race. But moving on into the midfield, where I think it got a little bit more spicy. P12, here's the good part for Franco Colapinto. He rallies all the way to P12 on debut. That is a nice, solid finish for him. He should be very happy with that. Williams as a team, I think, should be overall happy with the end result there. Car together, no issues. Good on you, Franco. That's a heck of a debut. P11 was Fernando Alonso, just missing out on the points. P10, we're going to talk about the points and Kevin Magnussen in just a little bit. He did manage to score a point, and then he scored some other points too. So he finishes in P10. P9, Alex Albon and the other Williams. So here's Williams' positive vibes all together here. Good finish for Alex Albon, getting Williams a hard-earned 2 points there. And now we're kind of into our power four as it is. P8, Sergio Perez. P7 was George Russell, who had an eventful first lap, which we'll talk about. P6, Max Verstappen. That was the best he could do after the bad qualifying form on Saturday. P5 was Lewis Hamilton, and in P4 was Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari. All right, Cody, big thoughts here in the midfield.
Definitely a really bad day for the Red Bull cars. They looked as weak as probably the weakest that they've been throughout the entire season. They could not fight forward at all. Max only gains one position from his starting place, which normally Max is able to take a poor qualifying session or a grid penalty or what have you, and manage to fight his way at least up to a podium. And the fact that he was only able to gain one position really goes to show how the Red Bull has fallen back compared to the other cars, and just how close the competition is right now. They started him off on the hard tire, which was pretty much the alternate strategy compared to most of the rest of the grid who was starting on the medium. And after the first round of pit stops, they pretty much sealed him into a two-stopper because they put him on more hard tires after that first pit stop. I guess they were hoping that the hards would last longer, and that after everyone had gone to the pits and he ended up out in front, that maybe the clean air would allow him to salvage some time with what was left on the hard tires. But he wasn't really gaining any time at that point, so they figured, we're just going to stop you, put you on some fresh hards. I think maybe at that point, maybe they were kicking around a one stop. Well, I mean, at that point they weren't kicking around a one stop anymore because they put it back on the hards. But I think they were maybe hoping that those hards would last longer for him and that they could maybe try for something like that. But they kicked that idea by putting him back on more hards. They told him at that point, just go as hard as you can. We're not really playing any games anymore. Just push. And I think that was pretty telling that the tire preservation had gone out the window at that point. They knew that they probably weren't going to make the gains that they were hoping for, so they just had him go as hard as he could, which really didn't get him very far at all. Didn't see his gaps ever really closing into the cars in front of him. Even at the end, when they put him on the medium tires, he wasn't really gaining any ground on Lewis Hamilton. And it was a pretty sad day for Red Bull.
Yeah, I mean, really the only net position he gains is because George Russell has the incident on turn one, does some damage to his front wing, and then has to come in and eventually change that front wing. And then that stop ended up being slow, and then George Russell's second stop ended up being slow as well. So, I mean, he gains, but he gains on a guy who'd had pretty much a really bad day, especially considering where he started from. So, yeah, I think this was just, it felt a lot like Singapore last year, where no matter what they tried to do to the car, and maybe it's when the weather gets really hot, because we know in Singapore, it's always very, very hot and very, very muggy. And that seemed to be the weather on offer here, was also very, very hot and very, very muggy. That something happens to the Red Bull car. It either stops giving input or feedback or something. Max was not a happy bunny at all, and neither was Sergio Perez, and neither of them could really do anything more than kind of what they did. So tough day, tough weekend at the office, I think, for Red Bull. They now will head to Baku, which I think will probably suit them a little bit better. They tend to go really well around that track. So, but we'll see. Is this really now the start of a chink in the armor, or is this just kind of a one-off? I always look at this race with kind of a grain of salt to say, I don't think anything that happens here is always pattern setting, because it's such a unique setup and it's such a unique track. And add to the fact that this year we had a new surface and it was as hot as it was, which it can get hot there, but I think this year was just more so than what they've had in a long time there. So, I don't know that this is the beginning of a pattern, but you gotta want to see some response after this. If you're a Red Bull fan, I think especially in the next race, because if not, the papaya guys are coming. They may be tripping over themselves, but they're coming. One way or another.
It definitely was kind of an odd race, even for Monza, because, like you said, the new track surface and the heat. Monza is traditionally a one-stop race for most drivers, and almost everybody went with the two-stop this time, which just goes to show how much more the tires were wearing down. From drivers in particular, like McLaren's, which we'll get to in a minute here. Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri were complaining about tire wear. Nobody really seriously was giving the one stopper. No one was really leaning in that direction until Charles Leclerc was kind of forced into that position, and they ended up making it work. But yeah, we'll be getting to that.
All right, so let's just turn the page and just get right into that. I mean, we can talk about the top 8 kind of as its own. We almost should I feel like at some point we should redo this and just say the non-top 8 and then the top 8 who kind of have their own battle here. But the podium did see in P3 was Lando Norris, P2 was Oscar Piastri, and in P1 with an incredible one-stop strategy that ended up working for him, Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari made those tires last a ridiculous amount of laps compared to everybody else on the grid, including his own teammate, whose tires did fall off at the end, which is kind of where, all the engineers thought was going to happen. So it was both Leclerc and Sainz that decided to hang it out on the one-stop strategy. Sainz conceivably having an advantage here with I think it was 9 or 10 lap younger hard set of tires than his teammate, but yet Charles Leclerc is the one that takes the victory and Carlos Sainz is the guy off the podium. So is this just Charles? So let's just talk about Leclerc and what he did first, because I think that's where the fun part of this is. So let's talk about that. How did he make that work? Was it just a question of tire whispering, or was it an understanding of the tire that a lot of these other teams didn't have?
Probably a little bit of both. I don't think the team, based on when they pit him, which was only a lap after McLaren's.
Yes.
I don't remember exactly whether it was 1 lap after Lando or Piastri. I think it was 1 lap after Lando, but they stop him then, which seems to give you the impression that they're just covering what McLaren has done, and they're going to follow a similar strategy based on when they were stopping and the tire wear that they were seeing. You figured that was the true stopper. And I think at that point, when Leclerc pit there, he got undercut and was pretty pissed off on the radio about having been undercut and saying things along the lines of, hey, I think the tires were okay. If we were going to get undercut anyway, why did you pit me now? Why not let me go a little longer and just, give me that much more of a tire advantage later, which actually, in hindsight may have helped him out even more with that strategy. But I think at that point, they kind of figured that if they were going to have any chance with a strong finish in this, that they had to try something a little different. And yeah, I don't really know whose call it was to turn this into a one-stopper, whether it was the team or Leclerc or, a bit of an agreement between the two. But at some point, they must have made the call you're either going to have to stop with everyone else and just lose that much more time, because that seems to be the direction it's going, or you can try to make it to the end and get that extra however many seconds it is for not having taken that other pit stop. And I think my guess is the team told him hey, that's what you got to try to do if you're going to make it into a good position. And he said okay, and gave it his all, and it worked out really well.
He kind of said okay. He was telling his engineer, basically, leave me the F alone by the end of that thing, because I'm sure it was managing a ton of stuff. But here's the thing that I thought they did by going on the one stop was they were the only team, basically the entirety of the weekend, that had pushed through the graining. Because even in the long runs in FP2, those long runs really only went about 10 or 12 laps. Everybody saw the graining. Everybody figured new surface, the tires are going to grain out. They're going to fall off a cliff. That's the end of it. Well, here comes Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz that said, well, if we push past the graining, the tires can come back a bit as long as we take care of them enough. And that's what they ended up doing. And they had enough track position gain after the second round of pit stops. And some of the people who took the second stops probably took them a bit too late with not enough laps to really undo the pit stop delta, assuming that the Ferrari was just going to, eventually have to give it up and pit. They also they were fortunate in that when the McLarens were trying to chase them down at the end, They were getting help from back markers who were holding up the chasers a bit. Not that they didn't get the blue flags. They definitely did, and they definitely abided by them. I'm not saying that, but it was just enough. Like the lap where I think it's Piastri's trying to chase past Carlos Sainz. He gets DRS, just happened to get lucky enough to hold Leclerc up, or to hold Piastri up another lap beyond that. So it was a combination of a couple things, but hey, fair, like I said, fair play for trying something that nobody else could have tried. And I heard it said pretty well kind of after the race. If they follow everybody and they go on to the same strategy as everybody else, they probably finish P3. If they hang this out, and yeah, they might not win the race, they probably still finish P3. So at some point, what else are you going to try to do? So I guess here it worked for them. And like I said before, fair play. And for Leclerc, who made those tires, eked them out, that could not have been fun, a well-deserved win. So let's talk about the Papaya team. I can't be upset with a P2 and a P3. I can't do it. I really can't.
You could be upset because it probably should have been a Papaya 1-2.
It could have been, again, but I all right, so let's just take it through, and then I'll give you my opinion on this thing. So off the start, we actually do get Lando leading into the first corner, which is the first time we've seen that in a while. However, that did not last because we get to the second chicane, and a move that should be celebrated and not denigrated. Oscar Piastri pulled off one heck of a move, and that is two racers going at it, and Piastri made it stick, and I give him fair props for that. So he ends up taking the lead on Lando early. It also enabled Leclerc to get around Lando early. That's what forced then McLaren to do the undercut on the first round of pit stops to try to get back around Leclerc. And that's probably what ultimately led to Leclerc even considering hanging it out on the one stop.
I was just going to say it was a little bit of a butterfly effect, perhaps, because, Oscar made that really awesome move to get into the lead. He's probably thinking that if I want a shot at winning this, I have to do it now, or else the team's going to tell me to, let Lando do his thing and take the win. But in making that move on Norris, Charles Leclerc is able to get through as well, and now you've got a car between both McLarens, and that probably throws a little bit of a wrench into what they want to do for strategy. You can't just tell the cars to switch at that point. Had they wanted to, let Lando get out in front and try to capitalize on these points in a race when it looked like Max wasn't going to be doing very well. So don't blame Oscar for doing it at all. He's a race car driver. It's his job ultimately to go out there and try to win. And he saw an opportunity and took it, and probably had a really great shot at winning. It wasn't like, we've seen in the past where, he's out in front of Norris and Norris catches him and passes him by for better handling of the tires or something like that. No, Piastri really pretty much had the measure of Lando most of this race after he got past him.
And I don't know of any F1 team that's going to tell their driver not to go racing on the first lap. Mercedes never did that with Lewis and Nico. Ferrari never did that even with Michael Schumacher. There would be team orders, but if there were team orders enacted, they'd come later when it was kind of obvious that you would need to do that. And in all of those situations, the championship battle was a heck of a lot tighter than what this is. So let's kind of be real here about what it is. I mean, Piastri makes the move. He now gets the preferential strategy. That's not a new concept. A lot of other teams are going to litigate that way. And they told Lando many times that he was free to race Oscar if he could get there. Now, there's the Papaya rules, which is what they've named their rules of engagement, and whether or not you want to have a laugh at that, fine. But that's also something that we've seen other teams do as well. Mercedes did that only after Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton took each other out of two separate races. Now, granted, they were so far in front of the field that it didn't matter, but that still was something that Toto Wolff decided that eventually needed to happen. So I was fine with Piastri being the lead car. That did not bother me at all. If Lando was going to be quicker, he was going to have to show it. He could free to race, that's fine. Lando did not have probably, I don't think this is going to be a race that's going to go into his personal Hall of Fame. I think this is one he'd rather probably forget about. There were one major, the major slip that probably ended up costing him at least a P2, and probably led to the whole Leclerc hanging it out on one stop, was the, in the second chicane, he made the little slip where he went around the bollard, and that allowed Leclerc to get back into DRS. And then if there was one part I thought where McLaren blinked, it was there, because Lando was saying the tires were still okay, and then it felt like they rushed Lando into the second stop when they didn't necessarily have to. And then that started the whole rest of the chain of everybody doing the two-stop. They waited a couple laps to then pit Piastri on the second stop. But here's the thing, when they pitted Piastri, and you know the tire delta is a 23-second delta, they only had 15 laps left. And I did not realize that until I actually watched the race the second time. So that, when I saw that, I was like, that seems a little late in the game to be doing that. You would have probably been better to at least push Leclerc into boxing first and then trying it at that point and seeing what the tires would have done. But I think that is a hindsight in 2020. In the moment, it seemed like it was the right strategy for me. It didn't look like it was anything that I thought was wrong. I thought Piastri was just going to use his pace and come back up. It wasn't until there's maybe 7 laps to go and the delta's still 8-9 seconds that you realize he's going to run out of laps. And that's basically what happened.
Yep, he ran out of laps. I think the amount that he was really gaining on Leclerc started to, the amount he was getting each lap seemed to be kind of decreasing at the end. I think Leclerc pretty much took it easy that last lap, which is why the delta got to be maybe as small as it did for the finish. But yeah, they didn't leave him with enough time to cover that gap. And I do think it is a little odd. The TV commentators were talking about this a lot as well, that they pit Piastri when they did, because he was pretty well out in front. Next car behind him was, Charles Leclerc, who was also on old tires. And it just seems a little strange that maybe McLaren didn't think this was a good opportunity to try to split their strategy, have Lando do the second stop for fresh tires, leave Piastri out there at least as long as Leclerc is out there, because Lando's having a good race, even though he lost it at the beginning. He's having a good race. He's in a really fast car. If he's got the fresh tires, he's going to probably catch up to Leclerc perhaps, or he didn't in the end, as we saw, but he's got a chance of doing so. And if you split the strategy, you leave Piastri out there on the one stop. Worst case, Charles and Lando catch you, and best case, you're able to make the one stop work and you get the win, which is what I think a lot of the TV commentators were saying, is that they thought that Piastri had a good shot at the win had he also tried a one stop. You don't really know that for sure. It could be that he wasn't ever going to make those tires last the way that Leclerc did. He was complaining about the tire wear, and the team even asked him over the radio at one point how he felt about doing a one stop versus a two stop. And he pretty much said there that he thought he was going to have to pit again because the tires were gone. So that goes both on Piastri and the team. Personally, I think that it would have been a better idea to split the strategy, but I'm also not the guy making gabajillions of dollars to make those calls. So, take what I say with a grain of salt.
Yeah, well, and it's a hindsight 2020. Like I said before, when they boxed him for the second time, had I realized there was only 15 laps left, I may have felt different about it. I certainly did when I rewatched the race. When I watched it in the moment, I said, this makes sense. Put them on the more aggressive strategy, which is what I would have said would have been let them go race, let them use their pace, let them catch up. And he was 5 seconds in front of Leclerc at the time. And it seemed to me that if there was one interesting thing, like as good as the McLarens were, they weren't, this wasn't McLaren car in clean air equals gone. Leclerc stayed on both Lando and Charles, Lando and Oscar, the entire race. So it was because of that, I think, that ultimately allowed then Charles to build the gap as much as he did. And he had a teammate in Carlos Sainz who didn't do anything wrong to hold anybody up, but he was hard to overtake. That's what he was there for. So, it kind of turned into the classic debate. Would we rather be going for race wins or would we rather be going for the constructors? Now, when we get to the constructors, it's now the tightest it's ever been in like 3 years. Mm-hmm. And that's how you get paid. Yeah. But I do think at the end of the day, if you want to go for race wins, you have to almost be willing to die a little bit. And I think if there is a criticism that I'm going to say about what all of the good that McLaren has done is that they worry so much about the worst case and they don't aim much more for the best case. The best case here is Oscar gets a win. The worst case is Oscar finishes 4th and Lando probably finishes 2nd. Mm-hmm. That's still a really good day at the office, even considering Max Verstappen. Now, when we get to awards, I do have a thing about team orders and the commentators over the course of this weekend and people trying to make a driver's world championship out of something that still has way too big of a gap. But I'll wait till then to address that part of it.
I will at that point give you my feelings on it too, because I might be leaning a little bit more toward the commentator's thoughts on that.
That's okay. I'm ready. But I do think, like I said, if there is something that annoys me about how I watch them operate, and I think for the most part they operate ridiculously well, it's that they are very afraid of, they're more afraid of the worst than they are okay with going for a stretch strategy. And it was kind of in this, yeah. And again, they come home in P2 and P3. It's double podium. They get a haul of points. It all works out. But at the same time, this is the Italian Grand Prix. There's a lot of prestige going about it, and especially winning in Ferrari's backyard would have been a nice, tip of the cap to them had they done it. But it played out how it played out. I mean, my ultimate conclusion of all this is I think Charles Leclerc did more to win it than McLaren necessarily did to lose it.
Yeah, I'd agree with you.
All right. So if we have no other comments about the race, we will suspend for now. We will take a quick break. We will re-rack. We will recap what this did to those point standings. Things are getting tighter a little bit across both championships, but we will see where all those shake out after this round. We'll then open it up to your comments on this race, fan email segment. We've got some good contributors here. We'll hand out some awards. We'll talk about predictions. Max Verstappen having a bad weekend, I think, scuttled both of us, but me more than you. But we'll talk about where that ended up at the end of the day. Then we will actually start to preview because we're going to Baku in 2 weeks. So we'll set the stage for that. So come on back. You won't want to miss it. Might get a little spicy, so you won't want to miss that either. You are listening to the Outlap F1 podcast, and we'll be right back after this quick pit stop. Grab your flu powder, broomstick, or apparate to your favorite audio streaming service to join the discussion on Hogwarts, a podcast, where Dan and his friends have in-depth chapter-by-chapter breakdowns of each Harry Potter novel. Join the group as they dive into the magical world and discuss plot points, analyze character development, and occasionally go off the rails. Whether you're a muggle who's new to the series or a pure-blood wizard who won't need a remember-all, Hogwarts, a podcast, brings everyone to the Great Hall for a magical discussion. Hogwarts, a podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome back in. This is Season 6, Episode 33 of the Outlap F1 Podcast. It's our 2024 Italian Grand Prix race review show. You've got Andy, and I'm along with Cody tonight, and we just talked about Charles Leclerc's ridiculously popular victory in front of the home fans. That scene on the podium, he's got a selfie of it that's out there. It's good vibes, babe, all up and down it. And I got to say, I can't really remember an F1 season that has had this many good vibes, babe, like moments. Like just throughout it, between Lando's first victory and Charles winning in Monaco and Charles winning here and Oscar getting a win. It's just good vibes across a lot of places. Don't
forget the Lewis win in
the Lewis win in Great Britain. Yeah, I mean, that's how could I forget that one? But
many good feel-good moments so far.
This season has given it to you in a lot of different ways. Probably the only one it hasn't yet is an actual Drivers' World Championship fight, but that is getting closer, as that's where we will transition after this round. Cody, if you recap those drivers' standings, I will say how close the teams are.
All right. So still out in front, we have Max Verstappen, still with a fairly commanding lead at the moment, too. He's out in front, obviously, in the Red Bull at 303 points now. Second place is Lando Norris in the McLaren. That gap has closed now to, 62 points. Lando's sitting there at 241 points. So, 62. Still more than a couple races worth of points, but the gap is closing. Third place with the best haul of points this weekend, Charles Leclerc and the Ferrari. As you said, very popular win in front of the Tifosi. He's now sitting at 217 points. In fourth place, the other McLaren driver, Oscar Piastri. He is at 197 points. Fifth place, Carlos Sainz with Ferrari at 184 points. Sixth place is Lewis Hamilton in the first of the two Mercedes at 164 points. And Sergio Perez, not as far behind Max this weekend as we've seen in the past. So I don't know if that's good for Perez, bad for Max, or just bad for the team in general. But either way, the gap was smaller this time. Sergio Perez is in seventh in the Red Bull with 143 points. Eighth place, George Russell had a bit of poor luck this weekend, it has to be said. He's in the Mercedes, and he's sitting there at 128 points in eighth. Ninth place is Fernando Alonso, the first of the two Aston Martin cars. He is a good ways back still from George Russell at 50 points. And then 10th place, holding on there, is Lance Stroll in the other Aston Martin with 24 points.
Yep. And as for the constructors, we may have actually a three-way battle here. It's getting tight here up at the top. Red Bull Racing powertrains continue to lead. They have been in P1 in the constructors since Spain of 2022. They continue to lead, 446 for them, but it is a scant 8 points. Remember when it was 150 points difference? That's gone. McLaren Mercedes are right on their heels now, 438 points for them. P3 is Ferrari. They have not gone away. They may have something to say about this Constructors' Championship before all is said and done. They check in with 407 points. P4 is Mercedes. While they are scoring points at a pretty good clip lately, the last two rounds have kind of hurt them in this, at least the standings, but they're pretty locked into this position, so they check in with 292 points. P5 is Aston Martin. They remain on 74 points. P6 is the VCARB team. They check in with 34. P7 is the Haas. They are now up to 28. So that P6 battle may yet still have some drama in it. P8 is Alpine. They are on 13 points. And P9 is Williams, who are up to 6 points. P10, we say this all the time, Kick Sauber Ferrari with 0 points. The highlight of, I think, their weekend was the Valtteri Bottas doppelganger that was in the stands. And they did a cool thing. They actually hooked that guy up with a VIP pass and actually had him meet the real Valtteri and took some pictures with the two of them right next to each other. So that was a cool moment For all of the guff we give Kick Sauber, when they do something cool, I got to call it out. So that was fun to watch.
Something that was just occurring to me looking at the constructor standings here. Like you said, it is now very close between Red Bull, McLaren, and Ferrari. So something I was thinking, let's say that Red Bull continues to flounder considerably, but Max manages to hold on and win the Drivers' Championship, which for the moment it still looks like is the likely outcome. When do you suppose was the last time that the team for the Drivers' Championship was not within the top two in the constructors?
I think I can tell you, and I think I know what it is. I think it was McLaren the year they got booted from the championship after the Spygate. Because
okay.
Lewis was able to keep his driver points, but the team standings were down to 0 because it was the year after he won that dramatic race in Brazil. Or didn't win, but finished fifth.
He didn't win the championship that year, though. He finished second that year, right, to Kimi Räikkönen.
No, it was
because I think 2008 was when he won, and that was not the year that they were disqualified. I think. Either way,
you may be right. Maybe it was 07. It might have been the Alonso year, because
the Alonso year was the year that they got disqualified, and that was the year that Kimi Räikkönen beat them both out, like at the very end.
It was the $100 million fine, and they were able to keep the driver points, but they were not able to keep the constructor points. Mm-hmm. And then the next year they started with car numbers 22 and 23 because they were in the back, and that's how you used to do the numbering.
Yeah.
So, but I think that was the last time where you had somebody this far up in the drivers not in the same car, and that was just kind of a statistical anomaly. Had McLaren kept the points, we would have had to really do some digging. But I was lucky that I was quick on the draw there, at least sort of. All right. So enough of our thoughts on the Italian GP. We now want to open it up to your thoughts on the Italian GP weekend. What did you guys think of the race? Who did good and who didn't? So we've got 3 of our normal contributors here: Dave Doherty, Rachel Fleming, and the Formula, who checked in from the race in Milwaukee today. He sent me a nice video, so shout out to Mr. Formula there. I was very jealous that I didn't get a chance to make it up there, but we're saving up for something possibly bigger than that. So let's put it that way. So we will have to see where this all goes in life. But Cody, it's your time to shine on the fan emails. What do we got?
All right. First one that we got in is from Dave Doherty. Thank you, Dave. And he says, well, that race was good, and I was surprised by Ferrari. Where did the pace and strategy come from? I was absolutely surprised to see a McLaren versus Ferrari fight. What were your thoughts? Were you surprised by this? As for Red Bull, I think this played out really well for them. As for Red Bull, I think that this is really played out for them. Excuse me. But the good news is that McLaren are in the fight with Red Bull for the team Constructors Championship, and well done Ferrari on winning at home. Mamma mia! Yes, definitely a very welcome thing for Ferrari to win in Monza. Those fans are very dedicated, very passionate, and as you were saying before, the podium celebration there is exciting anytime Ferrari is on the top step. You could see Charles Leclerc was very, very happy, very excited. You hear the entire crowd singing along to the Italian national anthem when that's getting played. It's just a blast. It's definitely a feel-good moment anytime it happens. I would agree with you, Dave, that I think that this, in a way, did play out well, or at least as well as it could for Red Bull, considering that they weren't really making any progress forward. The worst case scenario for them would be that Lando Norris wins the race, Oscar Piastri comes in P2, and that did not happen. So any points that McLaren does not take from them at this point is going to help them at least hold on to one of the championships. I think that was about as good as it could be. And I agree that I was surprised that this was a fight between those two teams to begin with. I figured after the front row lockout by McLaren, and I figured that even though Leclerc got by Lando in the first lap there, I didn't think it was going to last. I thought it was pretty much going to be the two of them romping off to a 1-2. And we were pleasantly surprised by it not being quite so obvious.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that did surprise me about Ferrari in particular was, and I know that they did bring a pretty good set of updates to this race, was the overall race pace. It seemed like they had conceded, especially after qualifying. Well, we're a 10th down. This is just kind of where we are. And that sounded like a bit of a concession. And then the race happens, and then they're not that 10th down, and they're not only on the pace for the race pace, but they also figured out how to make the tires last longer than all the other Big Four teams who all did the two-stop. So those were the two, I think, big surprising points. What I would caution everybody who is super excited about Leclerc's victory, again, whenever anybody wins at this track, I always say the same thing. This is such a one-off because it's a unique setup. And I also know that Ferrari go all out for updates for this track. If Ferrari are there again in Baku, and there's fair play if they are, then this constructors really becomes almost a three-way fight. If they're back to P5, P6, and Mercedes are back into the P3 and P4 positions where they've kind of been, it's going to get really tough for them. They have a lot of good things that have to happen, and they have to jump over not one but two teams that are going to be fighting like hell for this thing. So their constructors fight doesn't look like it's in their favor yet. That, of course, could change throughout the course of the rest of the year if they put some more development into the car. They're not far enough. They're not far out of this. This is within a race distance. So, whenever you are within that, you are in the fight. So now it is two teams that I think both Red Bull and McLaren are going to be marking as we go throughout the course of the rest of this race or the rest of this season.
Mm-hmm. I agree 100%. Thank you again, Dave. Our next email comes in from Rachel Fleming. Thank you, Rachel. And she says, well, that was an interesting Grand Prix. Firstly, well done to Colapinto. Came in late and did okay for Williams. This was the perfect race to learn the track, as Williams is usually very strong here. And then she goes on to say, how did McLaren lose this race? How? Saying that, though I am so happy for Charles' second Italian Grand Prix victory, and I'm so happy that his and Ferrari's risks paid off. They went for glory, and it worked. None of this, we aren't racing him, even though we are leading the race. And then she goes on to say, has K-Mag finally got that extra penalty point, meaning a race ban, which, as it turns out, we'll talk about in a second, he did get that race ban. If he has it, then it has been coming all season. I personally thought that Norris had a poor race overall. From pole, he made mistakes and didn't drive as well as his teammate. I decided to go on Sauber. Watch this race, and Bottas at one point was in the points, 9th at one point. I do remember seeing that. Joe was still last though at the time. Liam Lawson not going to Williams confirms to me that someone is dropping out one of the Red Bull seats at some point. I wonder if they will wait until the Mexican Grand Prix and then make the change. And then her apologies to Joe. Stroll was classified last, which again is some progress for Joe. And then lastly, she does make the amendment that K-Mag did get 2 penalty points. This has to be a ban, which it is because he met the threshold for the auto ban. She says it will be a farce if he doesn't get a ban. I agree, it would be a farce because rules say as an auto ban. I think at this point it's pretty much just already said that he is going to be sitting out of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix.
And it does look like we're going to see Ali Behrman be the deputy. I had thought maybe it would be Pietro Fittipaldi, as he is the current Haas reserve, but it does look like, from all the reporting I've read, and none of it's been made official, there hasn't been a statement from the team yet, it's looking more and more like Ali Behrman will, because he's going into that seat anyway, will just get a head start on his Haas development next weekend, or the next time out in Baku.
Yeah. I don't think they would leave him in that seat for the rest of the season either, because despite his frequent reckless driving, K-Mag is still scoring points. he did even score a point today despite penalties. So I do think he'll be right back.
That was after the 10-second penalty got assessed.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, he got the penalty, still got a point. So actually, not an awful race for Kevin Magnussen. And I think so long as he's still getting points, I think he will be right back after this race ban. Now, something that my fiance asked me earlier when I was telling her about this that I actually didn't know the answer to. Maybe you can enlighten me. How does it work now that he's met the penalty points for a race ban? Does he take the race ban and then he's pretty much back at 0 penalty points, or does he risk further race bans in a lesser amount of points if he continues to accumulate them?
So this is actually spelled out in the document that the FIA said about this. So, it's one of the steward's decisions, and it's decision suspension from next race for Kevin Magnussen. And what it says is the 12 penalty points drop away once he's done serving the race ban. So effectively what happens is he's suspended because his super license is temporarily suspended for one Grand Prix weekend. As soon as that is served, the penalty points are removed from his license. It's effectively a trade. He trades in the penalty points, he serves the race ban, and then he goes back. So he will come out with a clean bill of health, believe it or not, and 12 new penalty points to play with as after serving his one race ban. That is how this is structured.
All right, good to know. I know that might almost be a little threatening and fearsome, because we're kind of going with the assumption at this point that Kevin Magnussen is probably not going to be back in Formula One after this season. Do you think he's going to have 12 more penalty points to work with over the course of 6 or 7 races? So you think we're going to see more reckless driving from K-Mag in pursuit of getting Hulkenberg some points, or you think he takes it back a notch?
If there is an opportunity to present itself, possibly. I can't really think of where. I mean, maybe like in Singapore or something like that. But Hulkenberg would have to be in a clear position to where Magnussen would have to do some major things. Like, would we have another Miami? I mean, it's possible. We are in kind of uncharted territory. This is the first time we've ever gotten anybody to this. It was interesting to actually read the document where I said, "Oh, it's trade in. You trade in your penalty points, you serve a race ban, and then you're basically back with a clean bill of health." So, I mean, we're going to have to see kind of what does Haas do. I mean, Io Kodamatsu has shown that he is not afraid to tell Kevin Magnussen to do stuff like that if it is in the best interest of the team. And they are only 6 points away from the VCARB team in the constructors. So that, like I said, I don't think that fight is done. And this is now a new wrinkle. So it may end up actually working out for Haas in their favor somehow later on down the line, because, well, one, you get to start Oliver Behrman's development early. You get to see what he can do on a racetrack that's pretty challenging, but one that he's going to have to figure out in his F1 career. So, and then you get Kevin Magnussen back with a clean bill of health, and maybe there's an opportunity. So, what is it? The Chinese use the same word for crisis as they do opportunity. So there you go.
Yeah. Hitting on a couple other points from Rachel here. Yep, we're all very happy for Charles. Very, very awesome victory. We did touch on how did McLaren lose this race? Well, in hindsight, maybe they look a little foolish for the strategy they took, but in the moment, it seemed to make sense. So maybe not so egregious that they lost this one. I wouldn't even. I mean,
I reiterate. I think Ferrari went out and won it versus anybody else in the top 4 losing it.
Yeah, and I'd agree with you that this was. You can't sell Charles short on this one. I don't think he won the race because of a McLaren flub. I think they took a risky strategy and they made it work, which is all credit to them.
And their car passed post-race tech. So they get credit for it.
Yes, they do. Now, I don't really think Norris had a bad race. He got P3, and he outdid Max, which ultimately is probably what his goal should be for the rest of the season. But I do think it's starting to get a little ridiculous that it's becoming a little bit of a joke at this point that he is not able to keep the lead when he starts at the front in the first lap. And you said at this time, yeah, he kept the lead going through the first turn, which is normally where he's losing it at, but he didn't keep it very long past that at this point because Oscar made that awesome move on him. And I think that that's definitely something that Norris should be working on as his race starts that first lap. Maybe he's got to be a little more aggressive with how he's defending. We see Max do it all the time where he makes these, when he's starting up at the front, he makes these really aggressive cuts to either side to block off people from coming. I think maybe Lando needs to be a little bit more aggressive because he's got the pace to start up front there. And you would think that he should be able to keep the lead in at least one of these situations, but it's been a very good run of races now where he started at the front and hasn't maintained the lead after the first lap. So I think that is a little telling.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think you do make a very good point. I made the mistake of after the first corner thinking that was almost job done. And then I usually don't do this. I don't flip the timing on until like after the first lap, at least I think settles down, because you're going to see it first on the timing before you see it visually. And I don't know what is up with ESPN, but the delay that ESPN has, even on its main channel, which was the first time I'd really noticed it there, is so far behind the F1 TV onboards that it's almost laughable. I mean, Lando's getting past and the lights are going out on the TV. Whew. That's how bad the delay was. And instead of slowing F1 TV down to try to line it up, I just put on F1 TV throughout the whole thing, and they were on all my screens, and that tended to work out a lot better, at least for me. But I made the mistake of thinking when I saw Lando's onboard that he was through the first corner, and he had a good launch, and I said, okay, I can flip the timing back on, and then what is the first thing I do is I watch him drop, and I go, what the... Well, I'll say what I say during the races. I said, what the actual flying fuck? Because that's kind of where I'm at with this. It's this crazy thing, and it's never the same thing. Like last time it was the wheel slip. This one, the launch was a lot better. And maybe Oscar dive bobbed him, and maybe Lando didn't see it coming. But if there is, and to your point, I think Lando sometimes is too conservative in that he's trying not to lose it on the first lap. At some point, he's got to get comfortable with saying, I'm going to force this on you and you make the decision versus me always being the one who's getting things forced upon him. And I don't know where that's what has to happen to do that, but that's the leap he's got to try to make. Because everyone else is forcing things onto him, and he's not forcing it onto everybody else, and that's why it looks like he's getting taken advantage of so many times, especially at the start. Whereas it's the one time that everybody knows that he's vulnerable. And if you have a weakness in whatever your game is, in the Piranha Club, that's what's going to happen. People are going to go at it. So, it's I know he works at it. I know that they review all this stuff, and they'll review this one too, and they'll figure out what the next evolution is. If it was the same problem at all the starts, I would say, okay, it's just this, but it's something different every time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like part of it is a little bit of bad luck too. Like,
yeah.
Like you said, with the wheel spin, and this time he probably could have, would have, should have had the lead, and yeah, it just so happened that Piastri took the opportunity to make a little bit of a crazy move, and maybe Lando is being extra conservative because it's your teammate. Unwreck your teammate when you're out the front on the very first lap. We saw Mercedes do that, and we still talk about it, even though it's been like 8 years. So yeah, definitely a little bit of something different every time. Thank you, Rachel, for your email. Our last one in is from the Formula, who, as you said, was at the IndyCar race in Milwaukee today, and I'm just a little bit jealous. And they said,
He
"Damn,
saw a banger too. By the way, he saw one banger of an IndyCar race.
yeah." The one today was. I mean, they were both pretty good. I mean,
They were both extremely good.
The one yesterday. You know, I like Pato O'Ward, so it's good to see him get a win. The one today, I think that was Scott McLaughlin that got that one, and me and you were talking a little bit earlier about how that disqualification for the Penske drivers is looking like it's playing a real big part now, because I was doing the math earlier, and if McLaughlin hadn't been disqualified from the first race of the season, he'd only be like 10 points behind Palou, and it would be like championship on heading into the last race here. Instead, he's 50 points back, which means he's technically, mathematically in it if Palou didn't start the next race.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he's pretty much out of it. And, Will Power got a 10-point penalty for pretty much just for driving for Penske when all that went down. He didn't get really any meaningful benefit during the race, but they had the cheat pretty much available to him, so he got 10-point penalty. And because of that, even though he's in second place right now, he's going to need a miracle to win the championship. So, but all that aside, yes, they were very, very exciting races. Probably a good one to go see. It's fantastic weather here in the Midwest, so you're not probably baking out there watching the race at the Milwaukee Mile, which is good.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Will Power was he kind of sort of spun his championship away. I mean, he dropped it on one of the restarts, and Palou had opened the door because he was like 20-some laps down after his... Turned out it was a bad battery that wasn't allowing the starter to kick over, and the car would not start. And by the time they figured it out, they thought it might be a hybrid thing. Then they went back to the garage, and then they put him back out there. Believe it or not, that proved to be a smart idea to go back out there, because he actually finishes 20th, even though he was 28 or something laps down to the leader. But at one point, Will Power was mathematically in front of Palou in the championship, and then had the spin, and that was kind of it. I think he's 30-some points down going into the last race.
Yeah, he would pretty much, so long as Palou starts the race, he would need, which, is going to happen. He would pretty much need Alex Palou to end up like out of the race at the very beginning, so he's finishing practically last, and then he would have to perform very well. He'd have to finish like second, or he'd have to finish third and get like a good amount of laps led and a pole in there or something. Like it's not likely. It looks like at the moment that we're going to get a back-to-back Alex Palou championship, which it's been I think a long time since someone won back-to-back championships in IndyCar. I think the last person to do that was Dario Franchitti, who managed to do 3 in a row, and that was over 10 years ago now. So it's been a hot minute.
I'll say this for it: IndyCar was fun this weekend, if nothing else. I mean, I'm glad they fixed the short ovals, because they used to have such a bad aero problem. And whatever they've done, whether it's highline practice or making sure that tires are different or whatever it is, kudos to that series, because it made like the race at Gateway and the races here have been both very, very entertaining to watch. And so the season finale is at another oval where they're going to kind of have this package too. So it looks like the last race is going to be a banger, if nothing else.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. I've become something of an IndyCar fan over the last few years. It's been quite exciting. It's really cool to see some really young talents like Alex Palou pretty much making their mark on the sport. And it's a good one to watch. Like, if you're listening to this and you're not watching IndyCar already and you need something to give you that little extra fix if Formula One isn't enough for you, I highly recommend watching some IndyCar.
Unfortunately, there's only one race left. That's about the only bad part.
Well, yeah, you'll have to tune back in for next year, but
yes, but next year, get on board, man. It's totally worth it.
But Formula chimes in here and he says, "Damn, F1 is in such a good spot right now. Tension and storylines are scattered throughout the grid. The cost cap is working. Yes, I'm a McLaren fan, but I loved this win for Charles. Side note, we need more Nico Rosberg-led interviews. He's great at asking the edgy and hard questions. I did think that the drivers' interviews, for those top three after the race was over, were actually pretty good. They were pretty open about their disappointment, at least between like Lando and Oscar. Oscar pretty much came out and said that he was a little crushed by what happened. You could tell that he saw that the win was on the cards and it just didn't work out, which seems to have happened a lot this season for Oscar. He's got one thing or another going against him that's keeping him from getting more victories. So I do feel a little bad for him for that one. But yes, very happy for Charles and his win there. And yes, this is one of the best spots that Formula One has been in for a few years. 2021 is the one we're going to look back on forever and be like, man, that was like a championship for the ages. But even so, it was pretty much between two drivers at that point. And this has been a pleasant surprise this season where we thought we were going to get the Max Verstappen show again. And now at this point, we've had, I think 4 drivers now with multiple race wins. You've got race wins for 4 different teams. I'm pretty sure, 7 of the 8 drivers from those top 4 teams have had race victories now. It's so tight between them that, every track you go to, it could be someone different having just that little bit extra edge. And so, yes, Formula One's having a great one this year that I don't think really any of us expected. But it is very exciting, even if the Drivers' Championship isn't, quite as much up for grabs as it was a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is clearly the most democratic Formula One season I think we've seen since 2012. Full stop, no doubt. And I keep saying, I feel like this is the reverse of 2012, where 2012, it was crazy early, and then Sebastian Vettel got it together and just dominated late. Well, here it was Verstappen early, and now everyone else is coming to the forefront. We've got multiple teams winning multiple races. And I think you're right, Mr. Formula, about the cost cap. I've always said that I thought it was going to be a 5-year runway for that cost cap to really start to feel the effect for everybody. And this is year 4. And what are we seeing? We're seeing new teams up at the front. We're seeing old teams coming back to the front, especially in Mercedes. And we're seeing Red Bull not the pharaohs just looking over the kingdom anymore. But they're still going to be good on their day. I will say it now. Max Verstappen's going to at least win one more race this season. I can't tell you which one, but he's going to have to fight like hell for it. But
Mexico.
It could be.
I'm betting Mexico. He does really good at Mexico.
Yeah, generally that tends to go well. But we shall see kind of how this is going to go. But I mean, to your point, I think the cost cap definitely has some underlying effects of all of this. And to your Nico Rosberg point, I've always said this about him. I like what he says. Sometimes I don't like the tone at which he says it, but I can't disagree a lot of times with what actually comes out of his mouth. So as much as I personally don't like the guy, I have to respect, and to his credit, he has done the work of actually, it is a skill in asking a tough question and keeping a straight face when you're asking a tough question. And he does it probably better than a lot of the other ones do. I mean, I've seen Jensen try to do it, but Jensen's such a nice guy that it doesn't feel like he's really prodding. And when Danica Patrick tries to do it, it doesn't sound genuine, or for a lot of different reasons. But and when the basic Sky guys do it, like, I'm glad they had Nico Rosberg do this interview and David A. Valsecchi do the interview for qualifying, because Davide needs to get decaf coffee into his life because everything about that guy is just full on energy all the time. And I love that about him, and I don't ever want him to change. But for the race interviews, I think Nico Rosberg was the better choice.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. Thank you, the formula. Thanks everyone for your emails. We always love getting them in.
I actually at one point tweeted David A. Vielsecki about getting some decaf, and he actually liked my tweet. It's a long time ago.
Really?
When he was doing F2 commentary, and it was the first time I heard him, and I went, and he was so energetic, and he's gotten so much better at English. Like, that's the other thing. Like, these pundits who do this, they work at their craft, man. I will say that for sure. As much as I want to criticize what they do, when David A. Vielecki first did it, it was such a heavy accent. You could not understand anything he said other than in my point of view. And that was every other sentence was in my point of view this, in my point of view that. And then from that to where he is now, it's so much better. So that dude deserves a ton of credit. And I actually really enjoy when I see him because I'm like, oh, this is going to be full of energy, if nothing else.
Yeah, you can hear the veins starting to.
Yes, exactly. All right. So thank you again to everybody who contributed. I thought this was a very good discussion, good points across the board. It's really fun talking about this stuff with you guys. I totally enjoy doing it. All right. So we will transition into our awards. And we shall start, as we are always apt to do, with the rubbish and what we did not like. So, Cody, I'll let you go first on this one. What you got here?
My rubbish award is going to go to Kevin Magnussen for being the first driver of the penalty points era to receive a race ban. I guess you could say that this isn't even really a rubbish award for just this race, because it did take some accumulation of penalty points throughout the season that we have talked about at length to get to this point. But this was the last couple points he needed to actually get that race ban. It is a little bit of a shame because I think Kevin Magnussen is a bit of a fun character, and he does drive pretty aggressively on track, which can be really fun to watch. But that has come back to bite him in the ass.
Yeah, I mean, he is the first. We had to have somebody eventually do the Roman Grosjean rule, and Kevin Magnussen and Roman Grosjean will go down in history as they will be inevitably linked in F1 lore because of that. But my rubbish award goes out to just the general concept of, I thought we didn't like team orders. And this weekend, I heard a lot about team orders, and the fact was it seemed like everybody wanted to have team orders. Wanted to tell Oscar Piastri, don't go racing on the first lap. Wanted to tell Oscar Piastri, even though he was in front of Lando Norris and deserved to be in front of Lando Norris, oh, you need to give that position back. Because of a driver's championship that was still 70 points going into this race was the gap. And I said it before. Is there a point at which you need to start doing that? Yes. Are we at that point? No. We're still not at that point. I think even with 62 points, Max Verstappen could still have 2 races where he doesn't participate, still be leading the championship. That's too big of a delta. McLaren are trying to build something not only for now, but for the future. And they don't have a number one driver. They've never named a number one driver. One of the reasons I rep the team as hard as I do and I wear these colors and I've done it for so many years, the very first thing I noticed about them was they were always fair to both their drivers. When it was Mika Hakkinen and David Coulthard, and if David Coulthard was better on the day, you know what they let him do? They let him take the race win. Even if it meant Mika Hakkinen, who was fighting Michael Schumacher tooth and nail for a world championship, didn't get the max amount of points. Just drives me crazy. Like all of a sudden now here we want all these team orders because when you see it, everybody hates it. Everybody hates it. Everybody hated what happened in Hungary. Everybody hated when, Lewis takes an extra couple points on the last lap in Hungary one year. I forget who who it was against, or against George or something like that. But everybody hates when we see team orders. And now when we don't get it, and we have a team that's trying like hell to not do that, when it's not necessarily appropriate even to start doing it, in my view at least, everybody's screaming for it. So I don't get where we're going. I thought we didn't like team orders.
I guess I agree with you that I don't like team orders. And, Formula One tried to do away with team orders.
And then they went around it anyway.
They tried to get rid of this at one point, like 10, 15 years ago, ended up finding out that teams were doing it anyway using stupid code, and that we all knew what they were saying anyway. And then I guess just decided that there was no reasonable way to enforce this, and just, reneged on that. Team orders pretty much go against, I think, sportsmanship in general, because you're kind of doing what you can to legally fix a race in your favor, to the extent that you can, because you have two cars, and if you can switch them around in your favor, the team's going to say, look at the numbers and do that. And it's not fair to the driver who perhaps deserves to be out in front. On the flip side of that, yes, it is still a pretty good gap between Max and Lando. But the way things are going, that gap could actually close up before the end of the year. We saw how far ahead Red Bull was and how quickly that has changed. Now they're only 8 points ahead of McLaren in the constructors. If things keep going on their current trajectory and Red Bull doesn't make some big comeback, they really could actually close that drivers' championship gap before the end of the season. And it would be, today I don't think it would have mattered. Like, if they had told Lando and Oscar to swap positions there at the end of the race between second and third, it really wouldn't have made a big difference. It'd be 3 points. I guess maybe, you could argue that they're both still on the podium. So, why not give that edge to Lando? But it's 3 points. But if you keep doing this, if you keep having this back and forth between Lando and Oscar each race, which maybe, like you said, is the way it should be, the better driver for the day should finish in front. But it would be a little disappointing in a lot of people's eyes if they had the opportunity to make this drivers' championship happen, and they kind of have the appearance of getting in their own way, because it's legal for them to fix those results in that way. And yeah, maybe it's not fair to Oscar, but he is a team player. Lando is the more experienced driver, and the driver who is currently in that position to bring it to Max. So I think at the point that they're at, I do think that maybe this is the time when they should start making those difficult calls. Yeah, it stinks for Oscar, and yeah, it feels a little fixed. But if they're going to put up the fight and actually go for the drivers' championship, which I think that they should do, I think now is the time that they need to start actually, making the hard calls.
And what I would say is, if this continues to get closer, my view on this is going to change. It's going to evolve as it gets closer. But to me, if it's north of 50 points, I don't think if it's north of 50 points, we really need to be having that discussion. First off, fair play to Max for doing what he did at the beginning part of the season. And, he's built up the gap, and that's his gap to use as he sees fit, I guess. But I guess the thing that bothered me was it just seemed, and I get the 20-second victory in Zandvoort got everybody excited to say, oh, what could happen here? And I know everybody is wanting to have, in a great season, the capper would be an epic drivers world championship between Lando and Max going down to the last race, and let's see who's really better if we can get there. Trust me, I'm all on board for that. But I don't want to force it and twist yourself in and out trying to make something happen when it doesn't look like it's there. And to me, it just doesn't look like it's there. And I do think McLaren are going to address this, and they will, it will change. I think the papaya rules will evolve. And I think basically what that is you can race, but don't wreck, don't do something stupid, don't send a dive. Well, I was going to say don't send a dive bomb, and maybe if Lando has a bone to pick with Oscar about that, then that's fair. But that's also lap one, and again, I don't know how well you can control that even as a team on lap one. And I don't think you should. But I also think that this championship I don't think it's in play yet. Now, had Lando won and Max finished in sixth, I'd have had a much different headline, and I'd have probably worn a different outfit, and all sorts of stuff would be going on. And I had it in my head. I didn't write it down. What I would have said had that the qualifying result played into fruition in the race result. But that didn't happen. But it was amazing for me to hear so many talking about wanting to see team orders when it's something that I thought just in general it was frowned upon. Just interesting. Mm-hmm. Anyway, rant over. All right, so we will move into our analysis paralysis. I have a funny feeling we're going to have some convergence on this one. Cody, what you got here?
My analysis paralysis does go to McLaren. I do think that there was at least a better shot at Oscar Piastri getting the race win if they had kind of evolved, based on what they were seeing Ferrari do and tried to go for the one stop. I think they had a better chance at victory had they done that. As we were talking about before, hindsight's 2020. It's easy to make that call now. But I do think that it wasn't a crazy leap to make to at least try to go for that with one of your drivers who's out in front.
Yeah, I actually agree. I'm going to hand this to McLaren as well for making the second stop, not for making the second stop, but for making it too late. You needed to ensure that the delta you were giving up was actually attainable. And yes, you guys had great pace, but it seemed like every obstacle that got put in front of you, whether it was back markers interfering with your clean air or, Carlos Sainz doing what he did, or Max Verstappen, even on Lando, doing what he did for a couple laps there. It just seemed like you made your life harder when you should have probably just kind of let it seem that play out. And if you leave Oscar out on the one stop and it doesn't work, your alternative is you're probably looking at second and third anyway, which then flips everything around and then shuts everybody else up about the last thing we were just talking about. So maybe that would have been the better idea. But I think the critique still is, if McLaren want to get real serious about this thing and about race wins in general, and I get they're still trying, they may flip the script once they take the lead in the constructors. I don't know. But it seems to me that they are so much more afraid of the big negative than they are going after the positive. Yeah, we've got the 2 and 3. We'll take that. We'll take the Hall of Points. We'll move on. Yeah, but you had a chance to win the Italian Grand Prix today. And maybe if you were the aggressor, not just to overtake somebody, but to stick it to people with your pace and everything, maybe that wouldn't have been the way to go.
Agreed.
All right, so we'll move on to our dark horse. We've got a couple good candidates here. I'll go first with this one. I'm going to give this one to Alex Albon and Williams. At least his points did not come at a cost. So fair play to Alex Albon all weekend. Fair play to Williams for getting a couple hard-earned points. They have been few and far between. So for a team that doesn't get to shine very much, they did here. So I tip my cap to them here. Cody, what you got?
I thought this was an interesting and rare opportunity to give the same driver the Rubbish Award and the Dark Horse Award. It doesn't come up very often. So my dark horse is going to be Kevin Magnussen, because despite getting was a 10-second penalty for his antics today, and getting the penalty points that earned him a race ban, he still managed to squeeze into 10th place for that last point, which anytime that happens for Haas is a big win. So I guess I got to tip my cap to Magnussen on making that happen.
Yeah, somehow scoring 3 points, and 2 of them were poisoned. But I do think I actually think that's an Outlap F1 first, Outlap F1 podcast first, where we've had somebody get the rubbish and yet get the dark horse in the same race. I don't think we've ever had anything like that. So props to you, K Mag. You're breaking the wall in more than one way here. All right, so we'll go on to our driver of the day. I think we have consensus on this one. I tip my cap as a McLaren fan, as a Lando fan, as somebody who was wanting to see my boys come home with a 1-2. If I'm going to not get that, I would much rather lose it that way than any other way. And for the Tifosi, who I know sometimes their passion sometimes gets the better of them, they were able to live in it all the way today, and that was cool. And whatever you want to say about that environment, that was cool. So for all of the fun, the funness of the podium, I will grant Charles Leclerc easily driver of the day.
Yep, I completely agree. Driver of the day is Charles Leclerc. Even if you're a fan of another team or driver, like Andy and I both are, I feel like it's pretty easy to be happy about a Charles Leclerc victory. He just seems like such a pretty friendly, nice, relatively humble for a Formula One driver. It's easy to be happy for him when he gets these victories, and I just hope for his sake and for Ferrari fans' sake that those victories become more and more frequent.
Well, we're going to find out. He's going to have one heck of a teammate coming to him next year in Lewis Hamilton. Yeah. So the eyes will be on Maranello all year for sure. And when is that never the case? So it's just going to be ramped up even that much more. Okay, so we will move into our predictions. Boy, when Max is not on the pole, our predictions, just our overall score goes into the toilet. I'm just going to come out and say this. I scored nothing. I got nothing out of this weekend. All of my predictions went completely belly up. I had 2 of the 3 people on the podium right. They were just not in the right order. And my lap times were too slow. So I did not take the new surface into account there. Track Evolution bit me in the butt. So, Cody, you did win this weekend easily. You got 3 points. So not a great weekend for either of us, but you were better than I was. You got the fastest quali time, you got the fastest lap time. Your podium also got completely scuttled when Max screwed up. Yeah. But you did get the prop bet because you did have a red car on the podium here. So fair play to you, sir. You win a very tough weekend of predictions.
I think we've just gotten so used to over the last 2.5 seasons of Max being an easy pick for things like P1 and pole position and the like, that it's like now that Red Bull is starting to flounder a bit, it's like I don't know who to pick anymore. My brain still looks at pole position and says it's got to be Max again eventually, right? He's got to get another win soon, right? And it's just messing with our predictions, something fierce.
Ooh, well, we're going to have to re-rack, and I'm going to go back to school and do some digging into the data and try to figure out what the heck to do, because it can only go up from here. Let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. So anyway, we're going to take that week off. I do have a week off between now and the next round. That is Baku, the castle section, and the Titan Twisty Bits, and the long straightaway. Azerbaijan is up and coming. It's the latest I think this race has ever been on the calendar. So it will be Azerbaijan in the fall. We're usually seeing Azerbaijan in the spring and in the summer. So we shall see what the new season will do to this race and how it will affect everybody. But I expect at this point another tough fought battle between these top 4 teams, because it seems like they want to go at it all the time. So we will hit you with a preview, hopefully the Wednesday before. And then we will come back with a race review of the Azerbaijani Grand Prix in a couple weeks' time. Any final thoughts on actually quite entertaining and engaging Italian GP?
Just that we've seemed to be hitting more and more races lately that managed to be very interesting and engaging without safety cars or even yellow flags, because this race kept me engaged the whole time. I wasn't really sure who was going to win, and it was a flagless race. So it just goes to show you that it can be still interesting even with the unprecedented reliability with these cars that we are seeing.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking in the pre-show how and I've read up on this a couple times, the old axiom that the longer the engine is in the allocation, the worse, the less power it's going to generate. That has gone out the window. These things continue to generate. It doesn't seem to matter how old they are. It doesn't seem to matter how much mileage is on them. They take a licking in some cases and keep on ticking. So when you do see a failure, it's usually pretty epic at this point. So yeah, I mean, only one retirement here. Sonoda managed to get it back to the pits, so there was no need for an intervention there. Although in Azerbaijan, I'm almost expecting something from somewhere. It would be interesting to see if we get through that race without it, but that's another thing to watch out for in this ever-engaging F1 season, and we're just along for the ride, folks, so let's enjoy it. So that's going to do it for us. For Cody, it's been Andy. Always a lot of fun to do this, and as always, may all your laps be fast.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Outlap F1 podcast. If you like what you heard, click that subscribe button and be sure to leave us a 5-star review. If you want to connect with us outside of the show, check out our website at www.outlapf1.com. Find us on Twitter and Instagram at outlapf1 podcast, or email us at chatnow@outlapf1.com. As always, thank you so much for your support, and we'll see you on the next one.